The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the West Virginia storm as Clara Miles gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white as bone. Lightning split the darkness ahead, illuminating the winding mountain road that seemed to drop off into nothing. In the passenger seat, 7-year-old Elias pressed his face to the glass, watching water cascade down like tears. "Mom, where are we going?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the thunder. Clara's throat tightened. 3 months ago, she'd been Mrs. David Miles, living in their suburban Richmond home, with a husband who kissed her goodbye each morning. Now she was just Clara, a widow with $200 to her name, driving toward an inheritance she'd never heard of from an uncle she'd barely known. The letter from the lawyer felt like fiction in her purse. 43 acres and a log cabin beside something called Dead Man's Hollow. As another flash lit up the treacherous curves ahead, Clara wondered if she was driving toward salvation or deeper into the storm. The Toyota's engine wheezed as they climbed higher into the Appalachian Mountains, past abandoned coal tipples that looked like sleeping giants in the rain. Clara had been running on fumes, literally and figuratively, for weeks now. David's life insurance had covered the funeral costs and little else, leaving her to discover the mountain of debt he'd hidden behind his easy smile. The house was gone, the credit cards maxed out, and her part-time job at the Richmond Museum barely covered gas money. "I'm hungry," Elias said softly, and Clara's heart clenched. They'd split a gas station sandwich 2 hours ago, and she'd pretended she wasn't hungry, watching him eat with the fierce protectiveness that had become her constant companion since David died. "We're almost there, baby," she said, though she had no idea if that was true. The GPS had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving her to follow handwritten directions that Uncle Jasper's lawyer had scrawled on the back of an envelope. Uncle Jasper Gray Rock. Even his name sounded like something from another century. Clara's father had mentioned him maybe twice in her 32 years, always with a shake of his head and a comment about that old hermit up in coal country. Now that hermit had left her everything he owned, for reasons the lawyer couldn't explain. The headlights caught a weathered sign, Dead Man's Hollow, population 23. Below it, someone had spray-painted "Give or Take" in faded red letters. They descended into a valley where the storm seemed even fiercer, the wind howling through gaps in the mountains, like the voices of the dead. Clara's hands trembled as she navigated the narrow road, and she found herself wondering if her YouTube subscribers would even notice if she never posted another museum tour video. The thought surprised her. She'd started the channel as a creative outlet, sharing the stories behind historical artifacts, never imagining it might become something more. But with 1,800 subscribers and growing, maybe there was hope there too. The cabin materialized out of the darkness, like something from a fairy tale gone wrong. Squat and solid, built from massive logs that had weathered to silver gray, it squatted beside a lake so black it seemed to swallow the lightning. Clara parked under a massive oak tree and stared at what was apparently now her home. "It looks like where witches live," Elias said, but there was curiosity in his voice rather than fear. "Or where dragons sleep," Clara replied, trying to match his tone. "Should we go wake it up?" The key was exactly where the lawyer said it would be, under the third stone from the left on the front step. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo across the water, and Clara fumbled for a light switch. A single bulb illuminated a space that was larger than she'd expected, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and shelves lined with books and what looked like geological specimens. Everything smelled of wood smoke and old paper, not unpleasant, but foreign. On a rough-hewn table, she found an envelope with her name written in spidery handwriting. "Dear niece Clara," the letter began, and she read it aloud while Elias explored the cabin's 2 small bedrooms. "If you're reading this, I'm probably feeding the worms, which means it's time for the truth to come up for air. This land holds secrets deeper than the coal seams, and I reckon you're the one to bring them to light. Check the dock come morning. That lake's been keeping secrets for 140 years. And maybe it's time they saw daylight. The letter was signed Your Uncle Jasper, followed by what looked like a crude map of the lake with an X marked near the deepest part. Clara sank into a chair by the fireplace, exhaustion washing over her like a tide. Through the window, she could see the dock Jasper had mentioned, its weathered planks barely visible through the rain. Lightning flickered again, and for just a moment she thought she saw something glinting beneath the black water. Morning brought an unseasonable chill, and skies the color of old pewter. Clara woke to find Elias already up, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of instant coffee she'd found in the cupboard. "Mom." "Look," he said, pointing toward the dock. Clara joined him, and her breath caught. The storm had washed something up against the dock's pilings, something that gleamed dully in the grey light. She pulled on David's old rain jacket, still hanging in her closet like a ghost, and ventured outside. The object was wedged between two dock posts, clearly dislodged by the storm's violence. Clara pried it free and nearly dropped it in surprise. It was a small wooden coffer, maybe 8 inches long and half as wide, bound with iron straps that had somehow resisted decades of submersion. The wood was black with age but solid, and when she shook it gently, something rattled inside. "What is it?" Elias asked, appearing beside her with the fearless curiosity of a 7-year-old. "I don't know yet," Clara said, though her pulse had quickened. She'd spent enough time around historical artifacts to recognize something significant when she saw it. "But I think we need to find out." They carried the coffer inside, and Clara examined it more carefully. The iron bindings were hand-forged, the workmanship suggesting late 19th century. The lock had long since corroded away, and she was able to pry the lid open with a kitchen knife. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oiled cloth, were papers and photographs that had somehow survived their underwater tomb. The papers were fragile but readable, written in the same spidery hand as Uncle Jasper's letter. But these were much older, dated 1883, and signed by someone named Ezekiel Gray Rock. "My God," Clara whispered, reading by the window light. "Elias, this is about a mine disaster." The documents told a story that made Clara's hands shake. In September 1883, the Hollow Creek mine had collapsed, trapping 47 men underground. But according to Ezekiel's account, the collapse hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate, meant to hide something that would have changed the course of the Civil War if it had been discovered 20 years earlier. "A cache," Clara read aloud. "Confederate gold and documents hidden here when Union forces overran Virginia in 1865. The mine was built over it, and when word got out," she looked up at Elias, who was listening with rapt attention. "Someone made sure the secret stayed buried." The photographs showed men in period dress, standing around mining equipment, their faces serious beneath their caps. But it was the map that made Clara's breath catch. A detailed drawing of the lake bottom, with a large X marking the location of what Ezekiel called the true treasure of the hollow. Over the next 3 days, Clara threw herself into research with a desperation that surprised her. She drove into town, such as it was, and found the library, a converted storefront run by a woman named Martha Hendris, who seemed to know every story the mountains had ever whispered. "Oh, honey," Martha said when Clara showed her the documents. "You've got yourself a piece of real history there. The Hollow Creek disaster was the worst mining accident in the county's history. 47 men died, and their bodies were never recovered. What about Confederate gold?" Clara asked, keeping her voice casual. Martha's eyes sharpened. "Now that's a story I haven't heard told out loud in 30 years. My grandmother used to say there were treasures hidden all through these mountains when the war ended, but most folks figured it was just moonshine talk." She leaned closer. "Course, there are some in town who might not appreciate you stirring up old ghosts." As if summoned by her words, the library door chimed, and a man entered who seemed to fill the entire space with his presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Clara's car, and when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "Martha." "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the educated drawl of old money. "And you must be the new owner of the Grey Rock property." Marcus Cromwell. He extended a hand that Clara reluctantly shook. "Clara Miles. Mrs. Miles, I wonder if I might have a word. I represent several business interests in the area, and I understand you might be looking to sell. I'd be happy to make you a very generous offer." Clara felt Martha stiffen beside her. "I'm not looking to sell anything, Mr. Cromwell. I just got here." His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Of course, but you might find that mountain living isn't quite what a city woman expects. Harsh winters, limited services, difficult access. I'd hate for you to struggle unnecessarily when I could offer you enough to start fresh wherever you'd like. That's very kind, but no thank you." "Well," Cromwell said, straightening his tie, "the offer stands. Though I should mention that there are some questions about the property's legal status. Mineral rights, water rights, that sort of thing. These matters can become quite expensive to resolve, especially for someone without resources." The threat was subtle, but clear. After he left, Martha was quiet for a long moment. "Honey," she finally said, "you need to be careful. Marcus Cromwell owns half the county and has his fingers in the other half. If he wants your land, he's not going to just ask politely." That evening, Clara called Ray Dalton, a historian from the State University whom Martha had recommended. He drove up the next day, a scholarly man in his 50s who grew visibly excited as he examined the documents. "This is extraordinary," he said, photographing each page with reverent care. "If these are authentic, and preliminary examination suggests they are, this represents a significant historical discovery. The Confederate treasury movements at the end of the war are still poorly understood." "But what about the legal issues Cromwell mentioned?" Ray's expression grew serious. "Unfortunately, he's not wrong. Property law in these mountains can be Byzantine, especially when it involves mineral rights and historical claims. However," he brightened, "if these documents prove the existence of a significant historical site, there are federal protections that might apply." As they talked, Elias played by the lakeshore, building castles from the smooth stones. Clara watched him through the window, thinking how much he looked like David when he concentrated. The grief hit her in waves still, unexpected and overwhelming, but she was learning to ride them out. "Mom!" Elias called, and something in his voice made Clara look up sharply. He was standing waist-deep in the water near the dock, and his face was pale with excitement or fear. Clara ran outside, Ray close behind her. "Elias, get out of there right now." "But, Mom, there's something down here." "I can see it when the water's calm." Clara waded in, ignoring the cold that immediately soaked through her jeans. The water was clearer than she'd expected, and when she looked down, her heart nearly stopped. Maybe 20 feet below the surface, she could make out what looked like wooden structures, beams and planks arranged in deliberate patterns. "Ray," she called softly, "you need to see this." The historian joined them in the water, and his intake of breath was audible. "My God, those are mining structures. The original mine entrance must be down there, flooded when they diverted the creek to create the lake." That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind in the trees and thinking about the men who had died below. 47 souls, trapped not by accident, but by someone's deliberate choice to protect a secret. The injustice of it burned in her chest, mixing with her own grief in ways she couldn't untangle. She'd started her YouTube channel after David died, partly as a distraction, but mostly because she needed to tell stories again. At the museum, she'd specialized in giving voices to the forgotten, turning dusty artifacts into human narratives. Now she had the biggest story of her life, literally in her backyard. Over the following days, word of the discovery began to spread despite Clara's attempts at discretion. Ray had to file preliminary reports with the State Archaeological Commission, and Martha, for all her good intentions, wasn't built for keeping secrets. Soon, Clara noticed strange cars driving slowly past the cabin, and more than once she caught glimpses of men with cameras lurking in the tree line. The pressure from Cromwell intensified too. His generous offers became more frequent and more pointed, accompanied by visits from county officials who discovered previously unknown code violations and tax assessment irregularities. Clara's mailbox filled with legal notices and dire warnings about property liens and pending litigation. "They're trying to squeeze you out," Martha told her during one of Clara's increasingly desperate trips to town. "It's an old game in these parts. Create enough legal trouble that fighting costs more than selling." "But I don't have money to fight," Clara said, the words bitter in her mouth. "Honey, you've got something better than money. You've got the truth." That night, Clara uploaded her first video about Dead Man's Hollow to her YouTube channel. She titled it, "The Mystery Beneath the Lake, a Civil War Secret Hidden in West Virginia," and she'd crafted it carefully, focusing on the historical mystery without revealing her exact location or the most sensitive details. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments from history buffs, treasure hunters, and amateur archaeologists. More importantly, several viewers identified themselves as descendants of the Hollow Creek miners, people who had been searching for answers about their ancestors for generations, but success brought new problems. Within 2 days of the video going viral, Clara's property was swarming with uninvited guests. Treasure hunters with metal detectors tramped through her yard. True crime enthusiasts live-streamed from her dock. And conspiracy theorists set up camps in the surrounding woods. The final straw came on a Thursday morning when Clara woke to find a professional diving crew setting up equipment. At her lake shore without permission. "Ma'am, you can't stop us," their leader told her when she confronted them. "This is a navigable waterway, which means public access below the high water mark. This is private property." "The water isn't," Clara called the sheriff, but the response was lukewarm. Deputy Collins, a young man who seemed perpetually apologetic, explained that the legal situation was complicated and that he'd look into it. Meanwhile, the divers spent the day disturbing the lake bottom and finding nothing but mud and old beer cans. That evening, Marcus Cromwell appeared at her door. "Mrs. Miles, I think it's time we had a frank conversation," he said without preamble. "Your little internet adventure has created quite a stir, but it's also created significant problems. Property values, tourism management, public safety, these are complex issues that require careful handling." "I'm not responsible for other people's behavior," Clara said. But she felt Elias pressed against her side, sensing the tension. "Aren't you? You lit the match, Mrs. Miles. Now the question is whether you're going to help put out the fire or watch everything burn." His smile was razor-thin. "I'm prepared to make you an offer that would solve all your problems. Enough money to relocate anywhere you'd like, with enough left over to secure your son's future." "How much?" $200,000. Cash. Clara's knees nearly buckled. It was more money than she'd seen in her lifetime, enough to pay off David's debts and start over anywhere. But something in Cromwell's eagerness made her suspicious. Why so much? "Let's call it civic duty. I want to resolve this situation before anyone gets hurt." After he left, Clara sat by the fire with Elias, curled against her side, both of them staring into the flames. $200,000. Financial security. A normal life for her son, but 47 men had died to keep this secret buried. Didn't they deserve justice more than she deserved comfort? The answer came to her in the early hours of the morning, when she woke to the sound of engines on the lake. Through her bedroom window she could see lights moving on the water. Someone was diving at night, trying to avoid the daytime circus. Clara pulled on clothes and crept outside, leaving Elias sleeping. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of autumn and approaching winter. She could hear voices from the lake, professional and urgent. Moving closer through the trees, she recognized Marcus Cromwell's voice directing the operation. They had professional diving equipment, underwater lights, and what looked like sonar mapping gear. This wasn't treasure hunting. This was a serious archaeological excavation, conducted under cover of darkness and without permits. As Clara watched, One of the divers surfaced, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "Found it. The entrance is partially collapsed, but we can get through. The chamber's intact." Clara's blood turned to ice. They were looting the site, destroying evidence, stealing whatever historical artifacts lay buried with those 47 miners. Everything that might prove what really happened in 1883 was about to disappear into Cromwell's private collection. She pulled out her phone and started recording, her hands shaking as she tried to capture clear footage in the darkness. The video was grainy, but the voices were clear enough, and Cromwell's profile was unmistakable in the diving lights. A twig snapped under her foot. What was that? Cromwell's voice, sharp with alarm. Clara ran. She made it back to the cabin and locked the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window, she could see flashlight beams sweeping the tree line. They knew someone had been watching. She uploaded the video immediately, titling it "Breaking Illegal Nighttime Excavation at Historical Site." Then she called Ray Dalton, Martha Hendress, and finally the state police, leaving increasingly frantic messages about the illegal diving operation. But when dawn came, the lake was empty. Cromwell's crew had vanished, taking their equipment and whatever they'd found. When Deputy Collins arrived to investigate, there was no evidence they'd ever been there except for some disturbed mud on the lake bottom. "I'm sure you thought you saw something, Mrs. Miles," Collins said, his tone suggesting otherwise. "But without evidence. I have video. Well, it's pretty dark and unclear. Could be anybody, really." Clara realized with growing despair that Cromwell's influence extended deeper than she'd imagined. The fix was in, and she was fighting a war with water pistols while her enemies had cannons. That afternoon, a process server arrived with foreclosure notices. Apparently, the property had outstanding liens dating back decades, liens that had mysteriously been purchased by a company called Mountain Heritage Holdings. Clara didn't need Google to tell her who owned that company. 30 days, the server said apologetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Clara sat on her front porch after he left, staring at the legal documents and feeling the weight of defeat settling over her like a shroud. She'd tried to fight, but she was one broke widow against a system designed to protect people like Marcus Cromwell. "Mom?" Elias emerged from the cabin, his face serious beyond his years. "Are we going to lose the house?" Clara couldn't lie to him. "Maybe, baby. Because of the treasure? Because some people think money is more important than truth." Elias considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned too early that the world wasn't fair. What would Dad do? The question hit Clara like a physical blow. David had been many things, charming, optimistic, occasionally reckless with money, but he'd never backed down from a fight when he believed he was right. That night, as storm clouds gathered again over the mountains, Clara made her decision. She couldn't win through legal channels or political pressure, but she had one advantage Cromwell didn't know about. She was an experienced diver. In college, she'd been on the diving team, and even after graduation, she and David had spent their vacations exploring underwater wrecks and coral reefs. She hadn't been down since his death, hadn't even thought about it. But the skills were still there. If Cromwell's people had found the mine entrance, she could find it too. And if there was evidence down there, documents, artifacts, anything that proved what had really happened in 1883, she could bring it to light before his lawyers buried her under an avalanche of legal paper. She waited until midnight, when the storm was at its peak. Rain lashed the cabin windows and lightning split the sky, but the violence of the weather would provide cover for what she had to do. Clara pulled on David's old wetsuit, found the diving gear they'd stored in the garage, and checked her equipment by flashlight. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to risk her life diving into the same waters that had swallowed 47 men more than a century ago. But they died to hide the truth. She was diving to reveal it. Elias was sleeping soundly, exhausted by days of tension and uncertainty. Clara kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm going to make this right, baby. I promise." The lake was wild in the storm, its surface churned by wind and rain into whitecaps that reflected the lightning like broken mirrors. Clara waded in from the dock, the cold water a shock even through the wetsuit. She'd rigged a waterproof LED light to her mask and carried a mesh bag for any artifacts she might find. The descent was like sinking into black ink. The storm's chaos disappeared above her, replaced by an eerie calm that felt almost sacred. Her light beam cut through the darkness, illuminating suspended particles and the occasional fish that fled from her presence. At 30 feet, she found the first wooden beams, massive timbers that had once supported the mine entrance. They were arranged in a deliberate pattern, forming a portal into the mountain's depths. Clara's pulse quickened as she realized she was looking at the same entrance Cromwell's divers had found. The passage beyond was narrow and partially collapsed. But Clara was smaller than most professional divers. She squeezed through gaps that would have stopped a larger person, following her light deeper into the submerged mine. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and Clara's breath caught in her mask. Her light revealed a space that had been carefully carved from living rock, its walls still bearing the tool marks of 19th century miners. But more importantly, the chamber wasn't empty. Along one wall, wooden crates and metal strongboxes sat in neat rows, exactly as they'd been left in 1865. The Confederate cache was real, and it was exactly where Ezekiel Grey Rock's map had indicated. But Clara's attention was drawn to something else: human remains, scattered bones that told a story of desperate men who died trying to protect this secret. She photographed everything, her camera flash illuminating details that had been hidden for 140 years. Confederate currency, gold coins, official documents sealed in waterproof containers. The treasure was impressive. But it was the human cost that made Clara's chest tight with emotion. These weren't just historical artifacts. They were the graves of the 47 miners who'd been buried alive. To keep this secret safe, Clara was so absorbed in documenting the scene that she almost didn't notice the change in water pressure that indicated someone else had entered the mine. Her light beam swept across the tunnel entrance just as another diver appeared, his silhouette bulky with professional gear. For a moment, they stared at each other across the underwater chamber like gunfighters in some aquatic showdown. Then the other diver moved, swimming toward her with clear aggressive intent. Clara had seconds to react. She grabbed what she could, a small strongbox and a bundle of documents, and kicked hard toward a side passage she'd glimpsed earlier. Behind her, the other diver gave chase, his powerful strokes closing the distance between them. The side passage was even narrower than the main tunnel, barely wide enough for Clara's slender frame. She squeezed through, her air tank scraping against stone, and emerged into a vertical shaft that rose toward the surface. It was an old ventilation shaft, she realized, probably connecting to the mine's original entrance somewhere on the mountainside. She began to ascend, but the other diver was still behind her, and she could see more lights in the main chamber below. Cromwell had brought a whole team, and they were systematically looting the site. Clara's air gauge showed she was running low. She'd been down longer than planned, and the exertion of being chased was consuming her remaining supply. She had to surface soon, but the shaft seemed to go on forever. Then she saw it, a faint glimmer far above that might have been starlight or moonlight filtering down through cracks in the rock. The shaft did connect to the surface, somewhere up in the woods above the lake. Clara kicked harder, her lungs burning as her air supply dwindled. Behind her, the pursuing diver had fallen back, apparently unwilling to follow her into the unknown shaft. She was on her own now, racing against her air supply and the mountain itself. The shaft widened as she climbed, and Clara realized she was ascending through what had once been a natural cave system, later modified by the miners for ventilation. Her light revealed carved handholds and the remains of a wooden ladder that had long since rotted away. Finally, impossibly, she broke the surface. Clara found herself in a small pool at the bottom of a natural sinkhole, maybe 50 feet across and open to the storm above. Rain poured down on her upturned face as she gasped for air. The taste of freedom, sweeter than anything she'd ever experienced. She was reborn. pulled from the depths by her own determination and the ghosts of 47 miners who deserved justice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd found her new life in the same waters that had claimed theirs. Getting out of the sinkhole took another hour of climbing wet rock in the pouring rain. But Clara had never felt stronger. She clutched her waterproof bag containing the evidence she'd retrieved, proof of what had really happened at Dead Man's Hollow. By the time she made it back to the cabin, dawn was breaking and the storm was moving on. Elias was awake and frantic, and Clara held him close while she called Ray Dalton, the state police, and every news outlet she could think of. The story broke nationwide within hours. Civil War treasure discovered in submerged mine led the evening news, but the real story was darker and more complex. Clara's evidence proved that the Hollow Creek disaster hadn't been an accident, it had been a deliberate collapse, ordered by someone who wanted the Confederate cash to remain hidden forever. The documents she'd recovered included correspondence between Marcus Cromwell's great-great-grandfather and Confederate agents, detailing a plan to hide Treasury gold in the abandoned mine and then eliminate anyone who knew its location. 47 innocent men had died not in a mining accident, but in what amounted to mass murder. Within a week, federal marshals had arrested Marcus Cromwell and seized all his assets. The fraudulent liens against Clara's property were dismissed, and the state declared Dead Man's Hollow a protected historical site. More importantly, the remains of the 47 miners were finally recovered and given proper burial in the town cemetery, their names carved on a monument funded by donations from across the country. Clara's YouTube channel exploded overnight, gaining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who wanted to follow the story. But more than fame, she'd found her purpose again. She'd given voice to the voiceless, brought justice to the forgotten, and created a future for her son, built on truth rather than compromise. The discovery sparked something unexpected in the tight-knit community of Dead Man's Hollow. For generations, the town had been dying slowly, its young people leaving for opportunities elsewhere, its main street lined with boarded-up storefronts. But now, with the international attention on their hidden history, something began to shift. Martha Hendris approached Clara with an idea that would have seemed impossible just months before. "What if we turn this into something positive?" she asked over coffee at the newly reopened diner. "Educational tourism, historical preservation. We could honor those miners and give this town a future at the same time." The idea took root with surprising speed. Clara used her growing influence to partner with the State Tourism Board, creating educational programs that brought students and historians to learn about both the Civil War era and the industrial history of Appalachia. The Truth Seekers Foundation, as Clara named her nonprofit, began recruiting volunteers to help research other potential historical injustices throughout the region. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, a forensic anthropologist from West Virginia University, joined the team to properly excavate and study the miners' remains. Her work revealed details that made the story even more compelling. Evidence of deliberate cave-ins, personal effects that told individual stories, and most heartbreakingly, signs that some of the men had survived the initial collapse only to die slowly in the darkness below. These weren't just statistics, Dr. Rodriguez explained to a group of visiting high school students. They were fathers, brothers, sons. Thomas McKinney left behind 4 children. James Sullivan was only 19 years old. We're not just preserving artifacts, we're preserving their dignity. The memorial service for the 47 miners drew crowds from across the state. Descendants who had never known what happened to their ancestors finally had closure, while the broader community gained something they'd been missing for decades, a sense of shared purpose and pride. But Clara's favorite moments came when she watched Elias interacting with the visitors. He'd grown into his role as junior historian with natural charisma, leading groups down to the lakeshore and explaining how his mother had solved the mystery like a detective. The boy who had started this journey scared and hungry now stood confident and engaged, asking Dr. Rodriguez detailed questions about archaeological methods and pestering Ray Dalton to teach him how to read old documents. "You realize what you've done here, don't you?" Ray asked Clara one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold. "This isn't just about historical justice anymore. You've given this entire community a reason to believe in itself again." Clara nodded, thinking about the changes she'd witnessed. The general store had reopened, now stocking souvenirs and local crafts alongside necessities. The old schoolhouse was being converted into a visitors' center. Most importantly, young families were moving back, drawn by job opportunities in the growing heritage tourism industry. "Sometimes," Clara said, watching Elias skip stones across water that no longer held secrets, "the best treasures are the ones you create by refusing to give up." As her second winter at Dead Man's Hollow approached, Clara received a letter that would have terrified her a year earlier. It was from a law firm representing the family of another Civil War mystery, a missing Union payroll that had vanished somewhere in the mountains of North Carolina. They'd seen her work and wanted to hire the Truth Seekers Foundation to investigate. Clara smiled as she read the letter, already planning the trip. She'd found her calling in these mountains, diving deep into the past to bring light to forgotten injustices. But more than that, she'd found home in the most unlikely place, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her and Elias, not as strangers, but as family. The lake that had once seemed so dark and threatening now sparkled with promise, its surface reflecting not just the sky above, but the bright future Clara had helped create for everyone who called Dead Man's Hollow home. Epilogue. 1 year later, anniversary of their arrival at Dead Man's Hollow, fell on a crisp October day. The mountains painted in shades of amber and crimson that took Clara's breath away. She stood in the renovated cabin, now both home and headquarters for the Truth Seekers Foundation, watching through expanded windows as visitors from around the world explored the memorial grounds. Elias had grown 3 inches and developed the confident swagger of a boy who knew he lived somewhere special. He'd become an unofficial junior tour guide, delighting visitors with stories about the time my mom fought underwater pirates and how we saved the ghost miners. Clara didn't correct his embellishments. Truth, she'd learned, came in many forms. The phone rang, breaking her reverie. It was Dr. Sarah Chen from the Smithsonian, calling about another potential investigation in Montana where mining records didn't match local oral histories. "We've learned to trust your instincts, Clara," Dr. Chen said. "When you're ready for the next mystery, we're ready to support you." Clara looked out at the lake, where the afternoon sun created dancing patterns that reminded her of David's smile. He would have loved this, the adventure, the justice, the way their broken pieces had reassembled into something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. "Send me the files," she told Dr. Chen. "We'll be in touch." Elias burst through the door, his cheeks flushed from running. "Mom, the museum people want to interview me for the documentary sequel. Can I tell them about the time you made Cromwell cry when they arrested him?" Clara laughed, pulling him close. "You can tell them whatever you want, baby. It's your story, too." Outside, the lake sparkled with secrets finally free to dance in the light. And Clara knew that some storms don't come to destroy. They come to wash you clean and carry you home. Thank you for taking this journey with me into the depths of Dead Man's Hollow. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered something that changed your life forever? Share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you enjoyed diving into history's mysteries with us, consider subscribing for more stories that bring the past to life. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember that the truth is always worth fighting for.